Okay.
Live.
We're live, folks.
Yep.
Well, we're just about on 6:30,
Very soon.
so
That's technical.
I think we can start, Councillor. So it's time to open the ordinary meeting of Council on 21st of July 2020, being held in the Council chamber. And to start the official proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Jara country, on which the members and elders of the Jara community and their forebears have performed age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation and renewal. We acknowledge their living culture and their unique role in the life of this region. Council meetings are audio and video recorded and are made available to the public via electronic media, including YouTube. The Local Government Act, the Act, Part 12, Section 395 of the Act states that council meetings may be closed to the public during the prescribed period, which is May 1st, 2020 to November 1st, 2020, provided it is live streamed and the community have been provided means to submit statements or questions for council response. This is to ensure local government decision making can continue and remains transparent during the coronavirus epidemic. Councillors and council staff are required to continue to act in accordance with the Councillors' Code of Conduct and the Local Government Acts of 1989 and 2020, local laws and other acts and policies as prescribed. Where there are technical difficulties in being able to broadcast the meeting to the public, the meeting will be adjourned for 30 minutes until the issue is resolved, or postponed to 6:30 p.m. 28th of July 2020. I have a recommendation, councillors, that council closes the ordinary meeting of council 21st of July 2020 under the Local Government Act 2020, Part 12, Section 395, and 2, notes that when there are technical difficulties in being able to broadcast the meeting to the public, the meeting will be adjourned for 30 minutes until the issue is resolved or postponed to 6:30 p.m. 28th of July 2020. Do I have a motion? Yes. Councillor Neiman, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Lesser. Is there any opposition? Declare the matter carried. We have 7 councillors present. No apologies or leaves of absence. Declarations of interest or conflicts of interest for tonight's agenda, Councillor.
Yes, Mayor, that's myself on the item 10.2.1, Plan Harcourt.
Plan Harcourt, and the reason for the conflict of interest?
Because of rezoning and a possible conflict there. I might be involved with that. So there could be some money involved.
Pecuniary interest. Thank you. Potential. All right. So when that matter comes up, then I will ask you to declare that again, and then you will leave the chamber until the matter is finished. Thank you. Confirmation. Thank you, Councillor Lesser. Confirmation of minutes for the ordinary meeting of council 16th of June 2020.
Yes, Mayor, I move the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Mount Alexander Shire Council held on 16th June 2020 be confirmed.
Thank you. Do I have a second of that? Councillor Corley, thank you. And are there any opposition? Thank you. Okay, the matter carried. Nil acknowledgements, whatever they are. And now that brings us to public question time. Now, as we have already determined, the questions have been received via electronic means, but they could have been mailed. And I have a number of them here tonight, so I will be reading them to councillors, and then I will be calling on our senior officer to respond to each one in turn. The first question is from Ms. Sally Captine. The question is council concerned that the earthworks in front of number 7 Farnsworth Street, which is public land with a heritage overlay, sets a precedent for property owners to take public land for private and commercial parking? That is the question. And I think I will ask our director, Jess Howard, if she can supply an answer. Are you able, Ms. Howard, to respond to that question at this time?
Yes, in response to the question from Ms Capdane, council officers are always cautious about setting a precedent in making decisions. And in relation to the land in question, there was no intention in the granting of the minor works permit to allow modification, the creation of private parking spaces. And so that's why a minor works permit process exists, in order to clarify the scope of works and the nature of that work. And the purpose for which it was granted was not to provide private parking access.
Thank you. We have a second question on the same topic from Ms. Helen Capdane. There is a walking track on public land that goes up Farnsworth Street from the junction of Forest Street. Council has a walking and cycling strategy with the stated aim to improve and increase walking and cycling in the Shire. How is the recent addition of a car park on public land outside 37 House Farnsworth Street consistent with this strategy? Well, Ms. Howard, maybe you would like to respond to that as a variation on what you've already told us with the last question.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, this is related to the previous question. And council officers have been involved in recent times in reinforcing the fact that this is not a private parking area. A number of residents have raised with council their concern about preserving the pedestrian access and the walking track along this part of Farnsworth Street. And that's something that council officers are working to ensure that we can continue safe and clear access for pedestrians.
Thank you, Ms. Howard. Okay, so I'll move on to the third one, which is on the same topic, and it's slightly longer. Are councillors aware, oh sorry, this is from Mr. David Rako. Are councillors aware that the earthworks in front of 37 Farnsworth Street on Heritage Overlay 668 are being used as a car park and have been since day one? This not only appears to be in the Heritage Act, but also Council's own parking scheme, quoting from the parking scheme 52.06, to ensure the design and location of car parking is of a high standard, creates a safe environment for users, but must not adversely affect the amenity of the locality. The works were carried out under a minor works permit. Does this allow for the construction of a multi-vehicle car park on a steep slope in a heritage overlay? This facilitates the car parking needs of a commercial business in a shared community asset. This is not a minor works. Council's own example of their minor works application form include, on their form, 1, vehicle crossing, 2, sewer extension, 3, water tapping. What was applied for and how the earthworks is being used are different. Can council confidently assure the residents living below the car park that the engineering specifications, calculations and construction methods used comply with the relevant building regulations? Can council assure them that multiple vehicles parked close to an unlit, non-bollarded, unretained edge of an elevated car park should not concern the residents below? Is this car park fit to withstand large rain events? Finally, residents have requested an on-site meeting on numerous occasions to discuss concerns, as on-site evidence is compelling. Will a meeting be arranged? If not, why not? Ms. Howard, maybe you'd like to make another appearance on this one?
Thank you, Mayor. There are a number of matters raised by Mr. Rako, and most of these matters were raised with myself and the CEO in a meeting with Mr. Rako and other concerned residents on the 9th of July. And at that meeting, in response to the concerns and the matters raised, a commitment was given to the residents to go away and investigate the claims and concerns and to come back to them in a fortnight's time, which is in a few days' time, and we intend to meet that commitment. I'd like to repeat the comments that have been made previously about the works not being for private car parking purposes, which relates to a number of the matters that Mr. Rako has raised, and we will be providing a more detailed response to this and a number of other questions raised in the coming days.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Okay, so I'll bring myself to the last one, which is from Mr. Chris Hosking, and surprise, it's about the same matter. I refer to my question presented to the Director of Infrastructure and Development at the June 16 meeting of Council, where I questioned why a heritage permit was not sought for the minor works on the verge at 37 Farnsworth Street. 14 working days later, I received an answer. And while I understand that Amendment VC 142 can allow exemptions for works on land subject to heritage overlays, my question now is, was the consideration that the works would not change the appearance of the heritage place taken into consideration at the time that the minor works permit was granted? While it is pertinent to point out that the subjective nature of a decision involving appearances per se, I'm not going to enter into that here. It is far to advance that a reasonable, fair, I think, it is fair to advance that a reasonable person would assume that if the exemption was considered at the time of the granting said works permit, then my question could have been answered at the time of my question of June 16 instead of 14 working days later. To be clear, my question now for the Director is, was the exemption considered at the time of granting the minor works permit for the work on the verge of 37 Farnsworth Street? Ms. Howard.
In response to the particular question from Mr. Hosking, as per previous correspondence that Mr. Hosking has referred to in his public question time question, the minor works permit in the road reserve is covered by a general exemption for works by or on behalf of council up to $1 million. There was a further question raised though about the operation of the heritage overlay that's in place in this area. And in response to that specific question, a response was provided that those works under that particular overlay would nevertheless have been exempt as well. Council officers are nevertheless looking at whether there are opportunities for us to improve or strengthen the processes that we have around the issuing and processing of minor works permits in the road reserve, and this matter has been communicated to Mr. Hosking previously.
Thank you, Ms. Hunt. That brings me to the end of the questions submitted. There are no further questions, so I will close public question time for this evening. I don't need a motion for that. I'll move on to petitions, joint letters. Joint letter regarding subdivision in Steele Street, Chewton. Council received a joint letter on the 12th of June from the residents raising concerns in relation to the process behind the subdivision in Steele Street. And there's a recommendation that Council receive a report on the joint letter from residents raising concerns in relation to the process behind the subdivision in Steele Street, Chewton, at the next ordinary meeting of Council on the 18th, 2020, 18th of August. So that's a recommendation. Do I have a motion, Councillor? Thank you, Councillor Gardner, and seconded by Councillor Corley. Thank you. Let you read that. All right, well, we'll wait to hear that report when it comes to the next meeting. No committee reports. Record of assemblies of councillors.
Yes, Mayor, I'd move a motion that the council notes the record for the assemblies of councillors as required in the Local Government Act 1989.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Thank you, Councillor Corley. And that brings us to officer reports, and the first one being the compliance and enforcement policy.
Yes, Mayor, I would like to move that the council notes the approach to be taken by authorised officers to achieve community compliance with relevant acts, regulations and local laws. 2, adopts the compliance and enforcement policy.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Petrusma. And is there any opposition? Councillor Lesser, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would, Mayor, just briefly. And I'm actually quoting from pages 15 of the report. And I like the part that says, we will keep our community informed. Now, this is under communication and consultation. And it's basically also saying that the policy has been developed to govern an operational domain and associated decision-making that has a direct impact on the community and which has implications on how the community perceives council. And I think that's really, really important about how the community does perceive us. And as it points out there that, okay, currently our officers do work in line with the proposed policy. Because there is no actual policy, it means that the community members sometimes are not aware of council's approach to compliance and enforcement. And so this policy, being a public policy, will enable the community to see how we work. And you'll see under the legislation the amount of acts and regulations and local laws that we have to comply with. It's the Building, the Electoral Act, Food Act, Road Safety, and the local laws of Mount Alexander Shire Council. So I think this is really important, that the community knows how we are going to treat our community members in regard to the compliance and enforcement policy. They can look it up on the council's website when it is published there. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Councillor Mercer. Yes, Councillor
Just
Tristan.
really quickly, sounds fairly ominous when you see compliance and enforcement policy, but in actual fact, it's not ominous at all. The policy has a 5-step process, with the first step of that being to educate the public in relation to breaches, and the very last steps taken was the enforcement prosecution. So basically, the policy is about trying to prevent prosecutions and enforcement by voluntary compliance. So it's actually quite a good policy, and not ominous in any way.
Thanks, Councillor Tristan. Any other councillor wish to speak? And there being no opposition, I declare the matter carried. Right, moving on to the next one, we have Plan Harcourt, consideration of submissions and adoption. Please do, and declare once more why you're leaving.
They have a pecuniary interest, a possible pecuniary interest, because of rezoning.
Thank you.
And documentation has been handed to the council officers on
Thank you.
previous occasions.
Good, thank you. So Councillor Letts will leave us. And someone will remind me to get him back to the original page.
Do we have?
Right, okay, so we have a recommendation, do you have a motion? Councillor Cordy,
Yes, Mayor, as written.
Second.
seconded by Councillor Tristan. Is there any opposition? No. Councillor Cordy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. Look, in terms of the development of Harcourt, our staff have been working on this proposed planning scheme amendment for some time. It's a substantive piece of work, and it follows extensive consultation with the community. And firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the work done by our coordinator strategic planning, Lauren Watt. I know other people have been involved in this project, but Lauren has done a lot of work on the project right from the start. So I'd like to thank her and also the other members of council staff that have contributed to the document. Basically, this document, it'll be forwarded, once it's approved by council, it'll be forwarded to the minister for sign off. But once it's signed off, it will set the blueprint for the orderly development of Harcourt going forward, and it certainly gives the community a lot of certainty about what sort of development will take place, and it's a credit to all involved. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cordy. Councillor Patricia.
Probably reiterate some of the words that Councillor Cordy said. In first of all, thanking all the staff, particularly those in the planning section, the whole team involved behind what is a really good document. I personally attended quite a few of the public sessions out at Harcourt, and there's been a really good response. There's been a lot of public consultation. The public has been taken along with the council and had a lot of input into it right up until this final document. Recently, there's been what I think is probably one of the best levels of public consultation we've ever done since I've been on council. So I'm really proud of the work that's been done by our staff, and Harcourt will be the next sort of go-ahead place in the Shire. There are some rezoning matters as part of this plan, which will see Harcourt grow significantly and ensure its future as a small town and a great place to live in our Shire. So I'm really looking forward to the Minister signing off on it, should we approve it tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Petrusa. Yes, Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillors Cordy and Petrusa. I very much support this. And apart from what you've said about the really good planning and the community engagement and the strategic approach, one of the things that I think is important to note is the developer contributions are now being worked into into the planning scheme and everything else, which means that not only will Harcourt get more people there, but the people who are going to develop Harcourt will also then start paying for some of the requisite community facilities. And I think that's very important. It's something that we've been slow in catching up with our other major developments. And to get this in right from the start is really good for the people of Harcourt. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Other councillors wish to make comment here? Well, there being no opposition, I declare the matter carried. And I would like to just extend my congratulations to our planning officers, Strategic Planning Department, and certainly the Spots for all her work over quite a while. I remember when the first Plan Harcourt was first mooted, I think the cry went up from Harcourt, oh, not another plan, because there has been a lot of attempts to come up with big ideas for Harcourt, whether it's how the main street should look or what community facilities are needed, etc., etc. But I think this one trumps them all. I think we've actually managed to combine all the elements into something which is giving us changes to the planning scheme, and certainly which is what's needed in order for growth and for surety for the people of Harcourt in the future. So well done, and I'm very pleased to declare that carried and hope that the Minister does his bit soon. Thank you. And would you like to go and elect Councillor Lester? Thank you very much. Welcome back, Councillor Lester. Pleased to report that Plan Harcourt has been passed unanimously.
That's good.
Yes, and we'll be going off to the Minister for the certainly request for planning scheme amendments. So the next item is the Chewton Pool Incorporated operational support.
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to move the council approves a funding contribution to Chewton Pool Incorporated for the purpose of operating the Chewton Swimming Pool at $42,800 for the 2021 financial year, subject to receipt of a report for the Chewton Pool Incorporated on the 2019-2020 pool season and the finalisation of a new operational support agreement. 2, receives a future report to consider recommendation regarding funding for the pool beyond the 2020-2021 financial year.
Councillor Lester, that's a motion. Do I have a second?
Happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Petrusa. Is there any opposition? No, thank you. Councillor Lester, would you like to speak to your motion, please?
Yes, Councillor, Mayor, I happen to live diagonally opposite the pool, so I can see its use being fairly widespread, especially in the pool season. It seems to be fairly chock-a-block, and they run other events at the pool. Now, what is interesting about the Chewton Pool is to operate the Chewton Pool is lower than all council-run pools. And that's due to the use of volunteer labour to manage the canteen and some maintenance functions, including working bees, which they have quite a lot of, I can see, and that helps to do the presentation and the overall maintenance of the facility. Now, the Chewton Pool mob, as I would call it, they are able to mobilise considerable levels of community support. And I think that's really important. And as noted in our report, the Chewton Pool has really been consistently higher than a lot of other pools in the patronage in the Shire. They were also successful, and I think this is important, that they picked up 2 successful Pick My Project grants. And okay, the pandemic has not been the best as far as helping to move these forward, but they did pick up the 2 Pick My Projects. Now, they got, the first one they got was for $120,000, which wasn't bad, from the state government's Pick My Project initiative to warm the pool through solar heating. And of course, these works are currently in progress. If you go down there to see that, there was a bit of a hiccup, but they're well underway. And the pool also received a disability hoist through an additional community-driven successful Pick My Project initiative. So I think that this is really good for a local pool and a local community, and I can see that, that the pool is a really big asset and is maybe a leader in the Shire, and maybe other pools could pick up the way that the Chewton Pool operates and the cost to the council. So, Chewton's ahead of the game there.
Thanks, Councillor Lester. Yes, Councillor
Just briefly, I'll just note that most people should be aware that the pool's not actually a council asset, and some people may wonder why we give money to a pool, community-run pool, but it's far less money than goes to any other pool. I'm happy to support what is a reasonably moderate amount of money going to a pool where the committee, the Chewton Pool Incorporated, actually pretty much own and run the pool, and this is their main funding to operate that pool. The pool is widely used not just by the Chewton community, but by the entire Shire generally. I've been there quite a few times myself and helped run a few events there on occasions, and the clientele come from all over the Shire and sometimes from outside the Shire. So it's a really, really well run pool. It's a great family-friendly facility, and it's a relatively moderate amount of money. In fact, it's the least, as Councillor West said, the least expensive pool in the Shire as far as council's money goes. So very happy to support it.
Thanks, Councillor Trusler. Any other councillor wish to speak? Okay, well, there being opposition, I declare the matter carried. And as the Chewton Pool is dear to my heart, since the council I was on was instrumental in voting their first funding against the odds. It was not expected that it would get up, but it did. And from then on, they've gone from strength to strength. They showed just what Chewton can achieve. There was a massive amount of wider community support for restoring the pool to a usable facility, masses of volunteer labour, and yeah, businesses put in lots of money and in-kind support to get it going. It's been running ever since with communities. There's been a few changes of the guard, obviously, as people burn out or they do their bit and then they move on or retire. And this is just for 1 year to support the committee until they have a new agreement with the owner of the land, which is Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. And then the whole cycle begins again. However, I would urge the Chewton community at large not to take their community pool committee for granted. Just because it's running our Cuthworth and it's regularly said to be the best in the Shire because of the voluntary labour and the nice little spot, doesn't mean that it's all easy going. And I really urge the Chewton community to make sure that their community is supported, looked after, and helped wherever necessary, because that is a hard thing to do. So all power to them, but don't take them for granted, children. Thank you. That'll be my word. And now we move on to the next item, which is to give public notice to enter into a lease with the Bendigo Kangan Institute for 65 to 67 Templeton Street, Castle Lane. So, councillors, do I have a motion for this item? Yes, councillor Motion.
As recommended, Mayor,
Right.
which is that council, in accordance with section 190 and 223 of the Local Government Act 1989, publishes a public notice advising of its intention to enter into a lease at market valuation with Bendigo Kangan Institute for 65 to 67 Templeton Street, Castlemaine, and inviting submissions to the proposal, and 2, prior to making a decision on the proposal, consider submissions and hear any submitters wishing to be heard at a future meeting of council.
Thank you, councillor Motion. Seconder? Councillor Trusler, thank you. Is there any opposition? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Motion?
Thank you. So this is council saying we're interested in this, and now we would like to hear from public about whether they also consider this to be a good idea. We are asking the public to think about, is it okay for us to lease this for a period of, say, 2 years? And the reason that I'm supporting this, and I'm interested to hear the feedback, but I think it's really good for the TAFE to have security for 2 years for any potential courses. Now, of course, in this time, it's really hard to work out what you're going to do in any courses at any time. But at least they don't have the worry on top of that of, are we going to get kicked out with a month's notice? So this is about providing opportunities for our own residents in the Shire, and about giving the Institute some certainty, and also about some certainty for us in terms of rental income. I will be interested to hear what people to say, whether there's any holes to be picked in those arguments. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Motion. Councillor Trusler, did you second this?
Sorry, yes, well, only quickly, most people probably know this as the old Pinwa building. And I'm also looking forward to hearing what the submissions might be. But I, as a principal, certainly support an educational facility remaining in Castlemaine and offering our residents and young people a chance to undergo courses when that possibly becomes more available in the near future. So I look forward also to the public feedback and suggestions in relation to the proposal.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? Yes, councillor Lester.
Yes, I think it's great, and I think it's supported, the community should support it. And as it also says in our report, there's a possibility that they could get a secure occupancy for up to 5 years. So that's really important. And with this COVID situation that we find ourselves in, and I think that the federal government is pushing the idea that you could go back to learn, reskill, and do bits and pieces. And I think this is a really great asset for our community. And a few years ago, I was involved for a few lessons with some of the kids in there, and I could see the value of them using it, and also the land that surrounding it for building items of interest. So it's really, really important and a great asset. And so I'm hoping the community will support this educational establishment leasing a building.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? Okay, well, I declare the matter carried. So as much as you, I think fewer and fewer people actually know it's the Pinwa building.
I'm hoping most people do know that.
Pinwa, they were a clothing manufacturer.
Was.
The last one. Okay, sorry, I digress. The next item on the agenda is an important one. Asset management plans for pathways and bridges. We have a motion here to adopt a couple of plans.
Yeah, I'm happy to move as per recommendation that council, one, adopts the asset management plan pathways, and two, adopts the asset management plan bridges.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation, thank you. Is there any opposition? No. Councillor Petrucci.
Just really briefly, I mean, these are some of our major assets, our pathways, our roads, pathways and bridges are the major assets by buildings, I suppose, in the Shire. And the pathways and bridges often get overlooked, so I'm really pleased that we now have a management plan to ensure that our pathways and bridges are appropriately kept in good order, and the plan on exactly when they should be repaired, replaced, or kept in serviceable condition. So, support the motion.
Thank you. Conservation.
Yes, thank you. This is an incredible, these are incredibly important documents, and we as councillors really are grateful to have these come budget time, particularly because we don't then have to argue about whether it's the footpath on Smith Street versus the footpath and bridge on Brown Street or whatever. What this is doing is setting out some really good engineering principles, have a really good survey that says these are the assets you have to fix next. So it means that our money, ratepayers' money, the grants we get, are spent according to the highest needs. And I think that's a tremendous thing that we have to do that. It's certainly not, you know, when you have a look at the big long list, it's very, very detailed. It just shows the level of work that our officers have gone to make sure that every bit of our paths and our bridges are really looked at in detail. So it's not just a listing, it's an educated, well thought out, well researched listing here. So it means that possibly the days of the road being sealed in front of the mayor's house have gone. And that's a very good thing too. So I really recommend this. I'm very glad we've got it. I think it's a great guide.
Thank you, Conservation.
So can I just add, I forgot in my little,
We might want to do it at the end and see if anyone else.
oh, sorry.
Any other councillor wish to speak? Yes, councillor. Newman.
Just a minor thing. It set me off on a task to find out where all the bridges are named, where they are.
Aha.
We have a lot.
Yeah,
We have a lot.
but the naming of them, just naming like Piles Bridge or Jones's Bridge, doesn't mean much to me. So
As long as our councillors, our staff can find them.
okay.
That's what the numbers are for.
I think other councillors wish to say something. Yeah, you can get right in the files. Yep. Yes, councillor Lesser.
Thank you. Okay. I'm a bit keen on, I'm just looking at the pathways one, which is sort of catching my imagination a little bit. And I'm on the financial sustainability strategy. And I noticed that the budget for 1920 was 62,000, and the current plan expenditure scenario is assuming that we spend 200,000 a year over the next 25 years. So every 5 years, it's $1 million. And I just want to alert the councillors, and one of the things I'm a bit keen is that at some time in the not too distant future, that we could have a look at the proposition of council doing the pathways themselves versus the contracting out. So it's just one of those things that where we get the best value for the money, because it's a lot of money that we're expending. And a number of times our own staff have done footpaths to a very high standard. So it's just something that I'm raising, and the possibility that as soon as this great pandemic rushes over and the problems with it, that maybe that could be investigated.
Thank you. Other councillors wish to say anything?
no, I just neglected to thank the officers and staff that put these two plans together. They've done a really, really amazing job of putting together a couple of really good documents, very, very detailed, very thorough. And I thank all those that are responsible for that. It's remiss of me to say, not say that in the first place.
Oh, I'm sure they'll be pleased to hear that. I'm sure they're glued to the YouTube channel right now, following every word that you speak. That's good. Thank you. So there being in opposition, I declare the matter carried. And of course, in such important matters, I feel that the Mayor has some bit of a say. First of all, when they came to us for an initial consideration, I have always been of the belief that it was breaches that were our major problem, and there was no way we could actually keep up with the decline of our breaches. However, the report on breaches is reasonably optimistic and requires us to spend an awful lot of money on them, but we do anyway. I'm very pleased to see that not the current financial year, but in 21-22 financial year, the Bourne to Realtor crossing is scheduled for building.
Not actually a bridge.
No, it's a crossing. It will be a low-level crossing. And the year after that, the good citizens of Greenhill Avenue in Temple Hill will be very pleased to hear that their beloved footbridge is scheduled for renewal. So there are two precious bridges, crossings that are in the bridges plan. There's a recommended renewal of 800,000 a year, peaks to about just over $1 million. And then on top of that, we have to add component renewal. So it recommends that not in all cases do we replace the entire bridge. Sometimes the substructure that it's underneath, sometimes the superstructure, the guardrails, etc., and sometimes the actual road surface. But the maintenance will need to increase. However, the pathways are a bit more of a sorry sight. And in fact, if we just continue with our $200,000 a year input, the plan predicts that in 25 years' time, these are long-term plans, in fact, we will have a lot of failed footpaths. And in order to stop this happening, we have to increase funding to almost 600,000 a year, round about in 4 years' time. So there has to be, after the next 2 years, we have to steadily increase. This is just to actually make sure we have a set of good footpaths for the foreseeable future. We have to increase spending to almost threefold. Not for the on and on and on, but then after that peak in about 6 years' time, and then they stay and drop off. Of course, who knows? Because these will be reviewed every year, like all good management plans, and I'm sure they'll throw up new curly ones for the officers and the councillors, whoever they might be at the time. However, they are great, as Councillor Machin and Councillor Trusma say, they're a great asset to have any council and helps the long-term planning and budgeting. So, fantastic thing to have. Well done, staff. All right, well, that's those big items over, and now we move on to our statutory and discretionary reserve policy. Policy year to review. Do I have a motion? Councillor Gardner.
As recommended.
Thank you. And seconded? Councillor Gardner. Thank you. Is there any opposition? Councillor Gardner, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yep. I mean, this really is just policy. It's council obviously, as we go, we collect funds for things like waste, parks and gardens, and it's really just putting in paper that these reserves can only be spent on those purposes, and can't be sort of used elsewhere. Yeah, it's good policy.
Okay, thank you. Who's going to do this? Curious to speak.
Thanks, Mayor. Just to reiterate Councillor Gardner's comments, it is an important document. Council does need to generate capital funding for various projects from time to time in accordance with our long-term financial plan. And this document just says, sets out some checks and balances about how those funds in our financial reserves or in our bank account can be used, but also my understanding is it includes provision in there now for regular reporting back to council, and that'll end up in the public domain. So it's a very good process. So I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Cordy. Any other councillor wish to speak? Well, there being no opposition, I declare the matter carried and move on to the approval of Audit and Risk Advisory Committee charter.
Yes, Mayor. I would like to move that council approve the Audit and Risk Advisory Committee charter.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, councillor Machin. Is there any opposition? Councillor Lester, would you like to speak?
Yes, I would, Mayor. This is a very important document, and the work done by our executive manager, business continuity, has put a lot of work into this. And I also understand from previous discussions that we actually led the way in the state. So it is really an important document, and we've put a lot of work, staff have put a lot of work into it. Now, as it also states here, it is good practice to review the charter regularly, and that's mandated under the Act. Because there have been a few councils that have got into trouble, and so that this is why this has been referenced to a publication, a good guide to practice for local government in regard to audit committees. And initially the charter was provided to the Audit and Risk Committee earlier this year. The committee endorsed it and with amendments and feedback from the meeting, and a final draft charter was provided to the Audit and Risk Committee and was circulated and resolved in June 2020. And I think it's really important because it's right at the bottom of this page. It says the Audit and Risk Committee is the council's assurance oversight, which is known as the third line of defence. And the first and second line of defence is management controls and internal controls and financial controls. So these three lines of defence are designed to improve the risk management process in the organisation, and the committee's work is integral to that. So that's why it is really, really important to have this charter, because it is that point of third line of defence. And the people that are on this committee are really clever people, and they know their stuff. And so it's a great committee to work with, and this charter is really important for all of us.
Thank you, councillor Lester. Councillor Machin, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I support very much what Councillor Lesser has said, and how important an Audit and Risk Committee is to our council, any council, and also the fact that two councillors are generally members of the Audit and Risk Committee, but without voting powers, and they don't get paid. Just to be really clear that we are there watching and being part of and contributing and listening to what they're telling us, but we're not there to have any sort of real say in what's happening. So it then comes as a report to us. Any problems are addressed through a whole range of really good governance mechanisms. So it's a really important independent body, and have had the privilege of being on that for 2 years, previous 2 years, and have been very respectful of the intensity of their oversight and their absolute interest in making sure that our council operates with integrity.
Thank you, councillor Machin. Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? Well, there being no opposition, I declare the matter carried. Which I think brings us to the last item. The councillor Simon will be favourite. 10 minutes to go. The last item is a planning item, PAO 34/2020, 17 Hillview Court, Mackenzie Hill. So this is a planning application with a recommendation for refusal. Councillors, we have a recommendation. Do I have a motion?
Now I have a motion. And it is as printed, which is to refuse the notice of decision to refuse a planning permit for a 2-lot subdivision.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Is there a seconder of that motion? Councillor Machin. Is there any opposition? Councillor Gardner, would you like to speak to the motion, please?
This was actually a really interesting one, I must admit. And I think one of the lessons for me out of this was buyer beware. And because it was a little bit more complex with different parts of it. Overridingly, though, I suppose what it comes down to, the proposal is to split a block of land into 2, one being 390 square metres, the other 527. The problem is under the Diamond Gully structure plan, the minimum sort of subdivision is 500. So one of those blocks don't meet that requirement. And whilst I suppose it's state policy to encourage subdivision, I mean, that sort of Mackenzie Hill area is a newish area already, and this will probably set precedent if we granted a permit there, and undermine the Diamond Gully structure plan. So therefore, that's why I'm supporting the recommendation to refuse the plan.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Machin?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Yeah, it was complicated. It took us quite a while to understand all the background around this. And I do support not issuing a permit, which, given that I live on a subdivided tiny little block, could be seen as a bit hypocritical, but it's allowed in my area. And I know Mackenzie's Hill, this area, quite well, and I drive around it quite often. And I see that if we let this one go, there are many, many, many blocks within that development that could easily have this happen. And so that would be a concern to the people who moved in with clear expectations of what that area would be after our long fought out Diamond Gully structure plan. And so I think that would be unfair in many ways. So I support the recommendation not to issue a permit.
Thank you, Councillor Machin. Does any other councillor wish to speak to the matter? No? Well, being in opposition, I declare the matter carried. And that brings us to the end of the officer report for this evening. So now I come to one of the last items, which is a delegates report. And I'm expecting our CEO to appear on the screen and give us his delegates report. Yep.
Hello, Mayor. Thank you. Councillors, you've all got a hard copy of the report of activities from the Mayor and myself since the last meeting. Ones that I'm always happy to answer any questions about any of mine, of course. The one that I wanted to talk about tonight, or a couple of them that I wanted to talk about tonight, are the ones that relate to Rural Councils Victoria. As you know, I'm the CEO representative for the Loddon Campaspe region on that committee. And as you'd also know, Rural Councils Victoria is the representative voice of the 39 rural councils in Victoria to the state and the federal government. And the other thing we do is we currently provide research, development and promotional support and resources to rural councils and their communities with the objectives of creating sustainable rural communities and sustainable rural councils. And you'll see on there one of the other meetings that's listed as having happened relates to what I think is an excellent initiative being trialled first in the Loddon Campaspe region, which is our region, which is looking at creating new pathways for careers in local government that better attract and retain people from within our own communities. And that's for jobs like engineering, planning, building inspectors, accountants, environmental health officers, and more. It's a terrific project. It's just at the start of that process, but a really important one, and one that we're hoping we're going to be able to prove has got a lot of value that can then be rolled out across all of the rural councils in Victoria. Worth noting, Mayor, that projects like that have only been made possible by the funding that Rural Councils of Victoria receives from Regional Development Victoria. We've been receiving that for many years. And the other meeting that, or meetings that are listed in there regarding Rural Councils of Victoria have been to commence the development of a new strategic plan for Rural Councils Victoria. And while we're still yet to hear about the ongoing funding from the state government for our work, Mayor, beyond this current financial year is the guarantee that we have at this stage, we're really continuing to think big about and to think big and to dream big about the role of Rural Councils Victoria. So, Mayor, all I can say is we're very much hopeful that the state continues to see the value and the purpose of Rural Councils Victoria.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, CEO. Do councillors have any questions about any of the others? Yes, Councillor Mason and then Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. And I noticed that we had attendances at 3 funding announcements. And I think that's a lovely thing to have listed. So, do you recall how much we got out of those, Mr. Buzzard?
I may get the exact numbers wrong, Councillor Machen, but we did indeed have some very good announcements from certainly our good friend Marie Edwards, and Mary Ann Thomas also had an announcement in there for us too, which was terrific. But many hundreds of thousands of dollars, with the really big one in this list being for the Harcourt Recreation Reserve, where we got about 362,000, I think was the number for that particular project. Lots of great investments there from the state as well in the last month or two.
That's a good one. Yes, it's been very, very good to attend funding announcements. It's always nice to stand with a smile on your face. Thank you very much. And even Elphinstone Hall being given some money for their, that was when I attended, Mary Ann Thomas, who represents state member for Elphinstone, announcing 35,000 for the new kitchen or kitchen upgrade. So, Councillor Gardner, you had some.
I was more a clarification in that the Mayor attended the Heritage Subcommittee,
I attended the which subcommittee?
the Malden Heritage, and you're not ticked.
Oh, I'm not ticked.
No.
Oh my God.
So there you go.
Goodness me. It was fascinating. It was really high power.
And may I bring one up? I'm actually listed as attending the funding announcement by our local MP Marie Edwards at Harcourt. In actual fact, I did intend to go, but I wasn't feeling well that morning, so I was not actually in attendance, even though they said I was. So my apologies, but I wasn't there that morning. And the one I wanted to bring up was in relation to the Mayor's interview about the Offlead Dog Park, so which we have announced, and it will be starting soon. So the Mayor might want to quickly comment on that one, because it's been a subject of some contention for about 15 years.
Oh, media interview for the
Yes.
dog park. Well, goodness me, yes, I must admit, I was jumping the gun a little bit there, but I was so excited that we were finally going to get the Offlead Dog Park that, yes, I had to mention it to Main FM, and I think the word might have got out. But it's all good, and we're looking for that fence to be built any day now, aren't we? And the excitement went in.
Hopefully.
Yes. And of course, we had Councillors Machen and Patrusma arriving for media interviews with their dogs. And that was a very beautiful sight. Dogs come in all shapes and sizes. Any other councillor wish to comment or ask questions? No, thank you. Well, thanks very much, Ms. Buzzer, for your report, and with my few items there as well. It's been a busy week, busy month. Thank you. So no notice of motion, no urgent special business, no confidential report. So, I close the meeting at 7:30 p.m. Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you, officers.